In this episode, I want to talk about David Deutsch's chapter about dynamic societies. I want to connect it with Elon Musk's idea of competitive advantage through rapid innovation and adaptation. And I also want to talk about the Peter Thiel's concept of being unique and offering an unique, creative way of solving a problem, which is the only way to create value, according to Peter Thiel. These are all concepts that are part of our innovation stack, that are guiding our principles of investing. And I believe it's interesting to draw the lines between, because if you see how those axioms that Deutsch builds start working in companies, that axioms that Thiel builds connect with Deutsch's axioms and work in the real world, I think there is an element of truth or knowledge being developed here that gives us more safety and more conviction in our investment process. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's December 14th, 2020. This is Krimdelko. For the day, the fund is up 19%. For the year, we are up roughly 372%. The market today was down 60 basis points and is up 12.5%. For the year, we are outperforming by 359.5%. David Deutsch, in his chapter about static societies, talks about what he considers a static and a dynamic society, and he talks about memes. Memes are, to simplify, memes are sets of behavior that people, individuals, and societies start adopting. So memes are sort of the societal equivalent of genes. Memes generate behavior in people. Memes generate behavior in people, so either the existing memes get reinforced or new memes get developed. This is the key. So think about memes, or to use Joe Rogan's words, he talks about ideas. Let's talk about ideas. It's a bit more simple. So ideas are created out of people's behavior, and those ideas, they either develop new ideas and start building innovation stacks, or they start reinforcing themselves and not allowing for new ideas. And Deutsch says something very interesting that really made a light bulb switch on in my mind. If you're a static society, the one thing you want to do is, of course, keep the society static. So you put dissidents in prison, you kill people, you send the Gestapo out, you do all these things. We know about these things. But here's the thing that a static society even is more obsessed about than traitors and dissidents, which is the spread of new ideas. When I used to travel back in the day when the Soviet Union still existed, and I traveled to East Germany, actually, my only time I went behind the Iron Curtain was I went to East Germany to visit friends in Berlin, in West Berlin, so I had to go through East Germany from, I believe it was Hamburg. We took a train to East Germany, to Berlin, and you had to cross through the eastern part of Germany. Anyway, long story short, I was told by my friends, I was told by anybody who knew, just don't do one thing. Don't put any books in your luggage that have any kind of criticism and also certain ideas that are orthogonal to communism. So don't put David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity. Of course, it wasn't published back then, but you wouldn't want to put a book like that in your luggage. And I was very young in those days. I was like, okay, fine. You know what? I'm not going to put anything, because what do I know? Like, let's say Camus was very popular when I was a teenager. We read all this existential stuff, and I figured, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. So why was I so obsessed with books? I wasn't obsessed with drugs or guns. Like today, when I cross borders, I want to make sure I don't have drugs or guns. In those days, it was books, because books are the most ferocious gun, the most ferocious weapon you could imagine in static societies, of course. Not in dynamic societies. Dynamic societies take books like ingredients for progress. They're important, but they're not scary, because that's what the dynamic societies do. We read books, we develop new ideas. So anyway, I just wanted to use this little episode from my own experience going into a static society or passing through one, which was in those days going from Hamburg to West Berlin. You had to pass through East Germany, which was static, communism, dictatorship, all these things. You could not risk being caught with books that proliferated certain ideas. And this is the most scary thing for static societies. Don't let ideas even spread. If we look at certain religions, even, and I'm not just alluding to those types of religions, the fanatic type religions, the extreme people that walk around and you can see which type of religions they belong to. Even moderate, even here in the West, in Christian societies, there's a lot of statism. There's a lot of, hey, we don't do this, we do that. Hey, if you want to jump, first sit down and don't jump because jumping is bad for you. Or like, don't do anything which is not within the context of the memes which are already out there. And now I want to talk about the search for fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, which is what we really do at Orange Capital Partners, which is a more precise way also to define disruption a la Clayton Christensen. So when I use the word disruption from now on, and I spoke about this last week when we introduced our new mission statement, we stayed away from the word disruption because disruption is being misused in many ways. But we still want to stick with it when it comes to, at least when it comes to the innovator's dilemma, because we believe in that book, disruption is very well described and it's very clear and precise what it is. But we still decided to use a new mission statement, and the mission statement of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. So we replaced disruption with fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, which is just a little bit more precise in what we actually mean. And now let's talk about this concept of static versus dynamic societies, memes, and what does it mean, fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. This implies, by definition, that we have to criticize our existing concepts, which is another way to say meme. A concept is a more specific meme, let's say, applied to engineering practices, applied to a concept is, look, how do we build bridges? We build them this way or that way. A concept is, are we using, how do we do molecular biology? And from there, we learn that maybe we could use CRISPR or this billion-year-old defense mechanism that bacteria use to defend themselves against viruses, and we can develop a new engineering practice, which is called CRISPR technology. So what I'm saying here is that we actually have in our society, in order to be dynamic, we have to criticize our existing ideas, concepts, memes, and come up with new ones. And we at Orange Capital Partners are exactly at that crossroad where we look for those new ideas, we look for those new concepts, and then we invest in companies that are applying them and also developing new engineering practices. So it's a very nice segue from the epistemological definition of dynamic versus static society to a more business definition of dynamic society, which we at Orange Capital Partners strongly believe in. This is our way of wealth generation. Actually, that's the only way of wealth generation in a dynamic society, is to invest your wealth continuously into wealth generating new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. Because in a dynamic society, all the practices that apply for wealth generation in a static society, which is violence, coercion, licensing, drawing artificial borders and building fences, owning something and not letting others own it. I mean, a lot of, let's summarize it as violence and corruption and zero-sum game. That's what a static society has in terms of wealth generation. Wealth is static by definition, and therefore it's a zero-sum game, versus in a dynamic society, wealth is a dynamic concept on its own, and you can be wealthy and then lose your wealth if you don't continue to invest your wealth in the new concepts and engineering practices which come up. For example, you can put your money in gold. Bitcoin comes along and you might lose all your value because gold loses its value. You might own Fifth Avenue real estate in Manhattan thinking this is the safest possible asset in the world. And then there's COVID and New York collapses and becomes a useless city. And also there's competition all over the US and globally to attract money and talent. and the next thing you know, your value is gone. Even more extreme, of course, in the stock market, you can invest in Kodak. Eastman Kodak is one of the best companies of the 50s and 60s. Today it's bankrupt. You can invest in BlackBerry or Research in Motion, which developed the BlackBerry, which is the best thing since sliced bread until the iPhone comes along. And you can now invest in Amazon and Apple, but who knows who the next disruptors will be. And that's really what a dynamic society is. A dynamic market is look for new concepts with in new engineering practices with large impact. This is what generates wealth. So we're very happy about our mission statement. We believe that it fits very well into our principle stack and gives us also more confidence and conviction in our process. Lastly, I want to talk about Peter Thiel's approach also to wealth generation, which is a little bit controversial if you think about it. On the first, if you hear him talk the first time, he would say things like, you have to be unique, you have to be a monopoly of yourself, create your own world, don't follow any kind of rat race, don't believe, don't have all these things, degrees and pedigrees and badges that you accumulate in your years in high school and college, and they're all useless, because the only thing that matters is your uniqueness. And you might first think, well, what is this guy talking about? Because if I look at the real world, a lot of wealth generation, at least at first sight, seems to be exactly those types of people that come from pedigreed universities or rich families, and such and such as kid works for this successful venture capital company in Palo Alto, and such as kid works for Goldman Sachs, and blah blah blah. Now that might be true, and there's always nothing is black and white, but the fundamental truth in this concept is that if you want to develop new concepts, fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, and have large impact, you have to start with a new creative idea or a new creative meme. You have to do something new, and creative in David Deutsch's context means you have to develop new knowledge. But you cannot rely on existing knowledge. So here, almost by definition, you cannot rely on all the pedigrees that you gathered throughout your life. So that means that you can go to Harvard, you can go to Stanford, that's okay. It doesn't hold, I'm not going to hold that against you. But it's just going to be very difficult for a person that has been winning in a rat race to get to a place which is very pedigreed, to then come up with very unique ideas. So in my view, the only way you can do that is by either being just very talented and getting through all this selection process. Let's say you get to Stanford just because you're really good at physics, and period. You don't really have to play the game, be a well-rounded student, go to do some community service just to have it on your resume. You don't have to do all of these things. You're just really good at physics, and you sail through all your schools, and you get to do undergrad and grad school and PhD at a very prestigious university. And therefore you can still keep your uniqueness, your ability to uniquely develop ideas, basically your creativity. You keep that. So this is one way, and the other way is more the radical way, which actually is, if you check it against reality, which is that at some point in that process you give up, because you just cannot reconcile anymore your efforts and energy to win the rat race versus your creativity. So you drop out. And we have a lot of people who are dropouts who created lots of wealth, and that's probably a pretty accurate description of reality. So to summarize, we have a very interesting concept here of dynamic versus static societies. David Deutsch talks about the necessity to have memes that allow for creativity. Basically, memes have to allow for other memes to emerge that criticize the existing memes. That is possible. Deutsch calls this the post-Enlightenment society. So the main contribution of the Enlightenment was to allow this to happen, to allow criticism in science, in politics, in business to even happen. So all these institutions that were built after the Enlightenment came in the 17th and 18th century, for example, capitalism, capital markets, science, universities, all these things are the same thing, which is basically a mechanism to allow better ideas to replace existing ideas. That's all there is. It's It's science in business, no matter where it is, new concepts, new engineering practices, new ways of doing things, replace older ones, and hopefully always for the better. And this is the Popperian view of the world, which is if we allow enough competition or checks and balances, or if we allow the error correction process to be as free as possible, we will actually end up with better solutions, better ideas. Capitalism is the kind of process where companies replace older companies because they have better products and services, because they have lower cost structures. They can do the same thing for better, or in Silicon Valley terms, they can do much more with less. Regenerative growth, which is part of our thesis, is growth where you're not using resources, you're even creating resources while you're growing, which is a little bit what we believe Tesla is doing. Decarbonizing energy is just one thing. They're using less CO2, but they're creating a lot of other interesting new things and creating new, much better problems by decarbonizing energy. And on top of that, not using a whole lot of resources, almost no resources, zero resources, if they really are able to harness the power of the sun through photons and have a fully renewable energy source, which we don't have yet. But this is, of course, the goal of Tesla. So we have this concept of dynamic versus static societies, which fits very well into the idea of David Deutsch, which is the post-Enlightenment society. Is really a society that allows processes to replace existing ideas with better ideas. We have that in business. You replace existing businesses with better businesses. And we have that in politics and science. Now, we at Orange Capital Partners, we focus on the business side. Our mission is to invest in fundamental new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. So we're, by definition, within our mission, we have this replacement point, this error correction point. If you want, we could also reformulate ourselves by investing in error correcting concepts and engineering practices. But I believe that sounds a little bit too abstract, because what is error correction really? Error correction is something which replaces something else and it's better. So finally, also, I think that the Peter Thiel idea of somebody who has this unique creative approach is in fact the only type of person that can create wealth. This is a concept that goes back to the fundamentals of Deutsch and Popper by error correcting. So what is an entrepreneur is really an error correction entity. That is an entrepreneur. So this is not what Thiel said, but now I'm rephrasing 0 to 1 and the main contribution of 0 to 1, which is the ideal entrepreneur, the ideal startup that you want to invest in is an error correcting entity that has enough people, the optimal amount of people, to develop the kind of creativity or the kind of innovation stack which is necessary to error correct an existing process. We call this solving a problem in Silicon Valley. Now, finally, I want to come to the concept of rapid innovation or rapid adaptation. Elon Musk once on a conference call said, I don't need resources, I don't need assets to have a mouth, like brands or things like that. He was kind of countering Warren Buffett's famous say, you need a mouth in a company, you need this circle of this protective wall around your company. Like Coca-Cola as a brand, you can't penetrate that wall, it's so strong, etc. And Musk said, well, the company of the future, the wealth generation of the future happens by having rapid innovation. The rate of innovation defines how good you are, how competitive you are. What does he really mean with that? Let's put that in context with Deutsch, with Thiel. Let's put it in context with Popper. What exactly does he mean? Well, he's talking about exactly this meme of criticizing and replacing existing memes with new memes, therefore putting in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices to place to develop new problems, solve problems, develop new problems. So what he's really talking about here is a combination of Deutsch and the idea of having a dynamic society. He's talking about McKelvey and the necessity to innovate, not the choice, but the necessity, because building an innovation stack is about the necessity to error correct, to build new situations, to develop new ideas, new concepts, new engineering practices. What he's talking about here is Clayton Christensen, which is you are the disruptor, and by definition, you're coming up with something new which doesn't even have a market yet, and you're developing that new market in conjunction with the customer, with the new behavior. You're having a learning society, a learning organization which learns through the adaptation of what the new customers in these new markets are doing. And finally, you're also, in a very broad way, looking at Popper, which says that the best company out there is the company which replaces old practices with better practices. This is what Elon Musk was talking about. This is what we believe is wealth creation. Thank you.